and a few of you as well talking about Tony Blair being obsessed with making a Charles de Gaulle style return. Um, many of you agreeing with that. Chris saying Tony Blair is a very evil man. I mean, that is real fighting talk. It has to be said when it comes to the opinion that you have on Tony Blair. Anyone got a good opinion of Tony Blair? Anyone like I can see the economic case that he put across and why he was popular from that perspective, and he came across as a credible Prime Minister in waiting. That is something that Labour is most definitely lacking at the moment. Well, let's see what John Rentoul, the chief political commentator for The Independent and author of Heroes or Villains, The Blair Government Reconsidered, and Ashok Kumar, Birkbeck academic and political commentator, have to say on this story. Welcome to you both, gentlemen.
Hello there.
Start with you, John Rentoul. Author of Heroes or Villains, The Blair Government Reconsidered. Should we be reconsidering the Blair government and what it gave to Great Britain? Is he the man to save Labour in the year 2021?
Well, no, not him personally. I mean, maybe he would like to come back as a Charles de Gaulle figure, returning, called back to his post by a grateful nation. But I don't think that's going to happen. But what people ought to do, I think, is listen to somebody who won 3 elections for the Labour Party and has some useful things to say. And his long article in the New Statesman today has some very useful hints and tips for Keir Starmer as to how
like what? Because we know about the woke left that he said. That was kind of the headline from it, that Labour's been taken over by them. But what else? What other tips does it offer?
Well, no. What he was suggesting a way in which Keir Starmer could fight the culture war, which is obviously something that the cynical and opportunist Conservative government wants to do. And Tony Blair's point is that Keir Starmer seems to be shying away from that rather because he's a bit nervous about it, doesn't want to say the wrong thing. And Tony Blair suggesting how he should stand his ground. That the Labour Party is in favour of the values of a lot of what the woke movement might stand for. It wants to fight racism, it wants to promote equality, but it's got to distance itself from some of the extreme expressions of those movements.
All right, Ashok Kumar, Birkbeck academic. I mean, there's pretty good stuff in there. Tony Blair, as John rightfully pointed out, won 3 elections. He knows that Labour being slightly more moderate, maybe slightly more on the centre ground, is going to be something that maybe is advice that Keir Starmer should be taking, and actually fighting this woke left image that Labour's got. Isn't all of that really good advice?
Well, I don't think woke really means anything. I mean, frankly, I think it's that if it's really about what we talk about, whether we're talking about Tony Blair, the person, or a set of policies that he ran on in, 97. I mean, obviously, if it's the person, and I think he really wants to return, I think, frankly, the only place he should be standing is in a court in The Hague for the crimes he committed in Iraq, right? I think lots of people would agree with that. I think he has a lot to be held accountable for, and an untold misery that's continuing today. So I think we have to understand someone like Tony Blair in the context of the misery he's wrought on lots of the Middle East in particular. And he has remained fairly very unapologetic about that. In fact, he said he wished he'd done that to Zimbabwe and Iran as well. So I think putting aside the individual, on the question of policies, I think, even in the piece that Blair wrote, it's important to recognize that he came in 1997 on a kind of wave of discontent. I mean, 1997 isn't 2021, and every time a new election happened, he was winning with less and less of a share of the vote. At the time, he was riding kind of a wave of the economic boom that you saw across Western Europe and kind of the advanced capitalist world. And, as the crisis hit, you saw the kind of collapse of this kind of Blair-style parties across Western Europe, collapsing under the weight of that contradiction. And, in one of the few places, and this is, I don't want to get into a debate. I mean, we'll have to get into a debate about Jeremy Corbyn, but I mean, one of the few places where a party bucked that trend was actually in 2017 with Jeremy Corbyn's policies, because you're actually taking specific principled policies, whatever you might think of them, and he did very well, right? The highest vote share increase since 1945 in 2017. So it's important to consider also that the policies of Blair, if you look at 1997, for example, you see the party political broadcast, he's very explicit. It's not like, Keir Starmer. He's like, Tony Blair was talking about cutting class sizes, cutting NHS times, cutting regressive taxes like that, implementing a minimum wage. These were incredibly popular policies that were on the political left, and were actually specifically trying to move away, at least in part, from some of the policies of
But he was
Margaret
also
Thatcher.
very pro-business. I mean, one of the first acts that he carried out, and again, you may know better than I because I'm doing this from my memory, but wasn't it the abolition of Clause 4, which was the Labour Party's commitment to nationalisation? And it took all of those election losses and Tony Blair coming in as leader for that finally to happen, and for people to look at it and go, right, okay, Labour is not going to be this party of nationalisation. It's not going to be this party of the extreme left. And of course, since the Corbyn dawn of Labour, nationalisation was back on the menu. Nationalisation was back.
On poll after poll, whether you take water, you take transport, we're talking 70, 80% polling, poll after poll, for nationalizing at least these sectors, because people have seen the effects of privatization.
But he didn't win. It wasn't enough to win. That's the point, though, wasn't it?
But the policies that he passed around public-private partnerships, privatization, trying to move towards economies of finance and housing and speculation away from the real economy, which actually instigated much of the erosion of the red wall. If you look at the polling numbers from 2000, you see the erosion beginning then. Those weren't the policies that won Labour then. Those are the policies that are losing Labour now.
All right, John, what do you make of all of that? And specifically as well, the point of, well, 2 points really. Firstly, what a cheek of Tony Blair when you consider what he was talking about as the man, when you consider what Ashok was saying about the fact with Iraq and with the dodgy dossier, which, as I said earlier, contained more fiction than a Jackie Collins novel. When you consider all of that, what a cheek that he's having the audacity to now start preaching. But secondly, as well, about the economic argument that he made in 97, that actually people were okay, Corbyn didn't win, but people were reacting against that when Corbyn improved the vote in 2017.
Yeah, well, okay, I'll take Corbyn's win versus Tony Blair's 3 great defeats, and allow the viewers to make up their own minds about which is the right model for the Labour Party to follow. But no, I think Tony Blair has important things to say, and needs to be listened to. Jeremy Corbyn didn't win. Nationalisation is superficially popular, but it wasn't a programme that anybody bought. And Tony Blair has got important things to say about how you construct a winning electoral coalition.
But should the man who was so dishonest when it came to a war, I mean, this isn't sort
opinion,
but that's not an opinion. I mean, that's true. Where were the weapons of mass destruction? Where were they?
Wasn't an opinion.
That's your opinion that was dishonest, as opposed to
that's the Chilcot report. There's a report that says that it was dishonest. That's not an opinion. Report? The Chilcot report.
Ashok?
Yeah. He's referencing the Chilcot report, John.
Which didn't say it was dishonest. Absolutely not.
Absolutely, it did. It concluded that it was dishonest. What did it say?
No, look. Have you read the Chilcot report, Ashok?
Of course I have.
It said absolutely nothing of the kind. All 5 inquiries into the Iraq War concluded that the British government acted in good faith on the basis of intelligence, which turned out to be wrong. That is not dishonest. The intentions were actually possibly even noble rather than dishonest. And it turned out extremely badly.
John, respectfully, then it was incompetence. I mean, it had to be one of the two. Either they acted on intelligence that was completely wrong, and the Chilcot report said in categorical terms that Saddam Hussein posed no imminent threat. So either they knew that and they were dishonest, or they didn't know that and they were incompetent. Either way, it does somewhat great that then, when you consider all the effects of that war since, that Tony Blair now feels he's in a position to give advice.
Well, yeah, he's giving advice about British domestic politics, not foreign policy. I mean, I think Iraq is not an issue that's comparable to anything else at the moment. But no, I would defend the government's actions in that, and I think it's absurd to suggest that anyone should go to court just because you disagree with their foreign policy.
No, but it does somewhat damage the credibility of the advice that that person then gives, whether it be about domestic policy or foreign policy.
No, I mean, you can disagree with it, but he had a huge record as a prime minister over 10 years, particularly on domestic policy, which speaks for itself, and I think people ought to recognise that.
I mean, Ashok, that is a good point. It wasn't just around Iraq. Yes, whether it was dishonesty, incompetence, whatever it might have been, whatever anyone's opinion might be on that, that was one part of a very, very successful prime ministership. 3 elections won. I mean, doesn't that mean he has every right now to give his opinion on, as John said, domestic policy here?
Okay, first thing, the fact that we're even considering bringing back a widely reviled war criminal demonstrates really the bankruptcy of Keir Starmer.
I mean, you are stating that as fact, Ashok.
No, the bankruptcy of Keir Starmer's leadership. Secondly, I would say that people had no idea the sheer levels of destruction and dispossession, death, destabilization, the depth of deception and deceit that came out after 2005, actually. It took 5, 7 years, 10 years until Chilcot. Well, let's look at the polling that's come out right now about how popular he is. Keep pointing out from 20 years ago, an election. In 2017, a poll run by the paper that John's employed at, The Independent, found that 1 in 3 had a favorable opinion of Jeremy Corbyn and 60% unfavorable, while 1 in 5 people had a favorable view of Blair with 72% unfavorable, right? In the same poll of Labour voters, 60% were in favor of Corbyn, 37% unfavorable, while 37% of Labour voters supported Blair.
Why does he need to be liked? Why does he need to be liked to give advice? Any kind of
argument you might make against Corbyn about his unpopularity, double that number. And you get Blair.
Ashok, why does he need to be liked in opinion polls in order to give advice about how to win elections, which he did?
The argument you're making is about his popularity, about how that wins. Actually, what he won on was a wave of popularity. Even in his argument, he won on a wave of an economic boom that was winning across Western Europe. Those parties have collapsed. Name me, John, a single Blairite figure anywhere in the world other than Macron, and Macron is losing right now against a fascist, Le Pen. So there's literally no evidence that he has any popularity in the current.
Oh, Ashok, let him answer.
Other than Macron and Joe Biden, nobody.
Joe Biden. Okay, I got to respond to this. Biden barely won, and he was running against a deranged cartoon character with the highest negative since polls were started.
Oh, no, Joe Biden, another loser.
No, he's not a loser. What I'm saying is that he did 2 things that Blair is demanding Keir not do. Biden brought in the left. He didn't alienate them and dispossess them like Keir's doing, and Blair's demanding he does more of. And he adopted left-wing policies that Keir isn't doing and Blair wants him to do less of. Biden is now presiding over the most expansive, unprecedented expansion of the state. This isn't Blairism. The closest thing you'd find to Blair in America is Hillary Clinton, a centrist and an unapologetic warmonger who lost to Trump despite spending 10 times as much as him. She was like politically disemboweled in one of the most humiliating defeats in history.
Okay, John, I mean, what do you say to that? And that Biden is not a Blairite character because he's actually increasing the state.
Joe Biden was a very successful centrist candidate who people like Ashok didn't think could win. They wanted Bernie Sanders instead, or Elizabeth Warren. And Joe Biden proved them wrong. And Emmanuel Macron is a different sort of Blairite. He's also a centrist, and that's how you win. You win elections from the centre ground.
However, isn't he making a point there that by Blair saying, look, we need to get rid of the woke left, he's not then embracing these different factions of the Labour Party. He's essentially saying, ditch that side and go for the centre ground, the slightly right-wing part of the Labour Party.
You weren't listening to what I was saying, Cristo. He's not saying ditch the woke left. He's saying articulate what the woke left stands for in a way that that the majority of voters will find palatable, something that they can agree with. Because essentially, he's saying you can build a coalition around these values.
But woke left is pretty emotive language, isn't it?
Yeah, but he's not. He's saying don't use that emotive language. Don't allow yourself to be portrayed as the woke left by the Conservatives. And you can actually bring people together. I
mean, Ashok, isn't that the kind of harsh truth that the left wing of the party, not necessarily the woke left, but the left wing of the party needs to get to grips with? The fact that there is this perception that they're almost as intolerant as the far right with some of their opinions, with some of the cancel culture that they've been promoting. All of those harsh truths need to be addressed if the Labour Party are going to have any chance going forward.
I mean, look, I think it's important that we talk about the evidence, right? Like, not just nonsense theories, but actually the evidence. Keir Starmer is a centrist candidate, and he just had an abysmal election. Hartlepool, it was a 16-point swing to Boris. He lost Durham Council the first time since 1925. They lost 1 in 8 councils. Peter Mandelson, an architect of New Labour, was an unofficial advisor to Starmer. And, we saw, Corbyn wins it in 2017. He wins it by 22,000 votes, Hartlepool, from 14,000 in 2015.
So, Darren, I can just see. Go on. Just finish, Ashok. Go on. Sorry, please.
Okay, I'll just say this. Mendelssohn's argument in 2010 in the book, in his memoirs, The Third Man, he explicitly says that that Blair had insufficient industrial policy, which led to either the real disposable incomes either were stagnant or falling in parts of the North. And this accelerated deindustrialization, eroded the public sector, hollowed out the labor market. These policies by Blair, and Blair wasn't even the economy guy. The economy guy was Brown, who couldn't win an election. Blair was the international policy guy. But even on the economic policy, the erosion, the dismantling of the Red Wall begins with Blair. We can't forget that.
Okay, John, I heard you objecting massively when Peter Mandelson's name was brought into things in the relation of Keir Starmer. What do you want to say about that?
Well, Peter Mandelson isn't advising Keir Starmer. I mean, that's just not the case. And the idea that the Red Wall, that it's Tony Blair's fault that the Red Wall has collapsed, is just not borne out by the evidence. The Red Wall started to collapse in the 2010 and 2015 elections, and the real collapse happened, of course, in 2019 under Jeremy Corbyn.
Ashok?
I mean, if we want to go over the Jeremy Corbyn collapse, it's precisely
the point is, Ashok, Jeremy Corbyn never won. And I really think a part of this that we're perhaps not considering is the hangover of what people saw as the grim 1970s, of which I think Corbyn was always seen as something of a throwback to that period, of the Michael Foot period of politics. Now, you may not agree with that, but that is absolutely the perception.
I'm not disagreeing with what you're saying. I'm saying it is the case that in 2017, we had the largest vote share increase in the Labour Party since 1945. That is something, right? That was around Corbyn policy.
It's not.
2019. 2019. Let me just say this. 2019 was a referendum basically on the fact that he pushed a people's vote. So 52 of the 54 seats that we lost were Brexit voting seats. So I'm not denying it, but the idea that somehow because, and Corbyn still won in Hartlepool. And you're suggesting that the reason, and Mendelsohn suggesting this, and I'm sure John does as well, that the reason Starmer's losing now, by the way, I mean, Starmer lost the election, right? He lost it. And some might even call him a loser candidate. You need to own that. Pawning it off to someone who announced that they'd step down in 2019 when we're 6 months shy of 2022 is pathetic. It's weak. In the most recent YouGov poll, Keir's negative polling was at 74%. That's 15%.
John, is
Corbyn's lowest polling number.
Is this all an argument, John, then, that the Labour Party needs to go left? Biggest vote share increase in 2017. Yes, it wasn't enough to win. 2019 had the Brexit factor involved in that, which is why Boris seemed to prosper so much. Would the solution to Labour's problems be to actually not really listen to Tony Blair and go left?
Well, no. I mean, the point is, I accept that Labour did extremely well in 2017. And I don't think any Blairite who tries to pretend that election didn't happen is just being dishonest. Jeremy Corbyn exceeded all our expectations, nearly ended up being prime minister, which would have been a disaster for the country, incidentally. But I mean, that's a different argument. Then his supporters took the wrong lesson from that near victory, which was to go further to the left, which of course proved to be utterly disastrous. I mean, that's the problem. I mean, Jeremy Corbyn only did well in the 2017 election because Theresa May was such a hopeless opponent.
With a hopeless campaign as well. That was the worst election campaign, I think, in history.
Absolutely, with that plan to take old people's homes away for them to pay for their dementia care.
All right, final question to you both. I'm not sure you're going to agree, but do you think, going back to what you said at the very start, do you think this is all laying the groundwork for Tony Blair to return to frontline politics, and do you think he wants to? John, I'll start with you.
Well, I mean, I'm sure he'd love to, but he's not going to, and he's realistic enough to know that perfectly well. But I think he does get frustrated because he sees, Keir Starmer not doing very well when the Labour Party could be doing so much better, and he's trying to help out. Nothing wrong with that.
Ashok, what about you? He's only trying to help out. Would you think he should be back?
I want him to run. I want him to run so that all the people in the world that go on and on about how great Blair is can be humiliated. He slaughtered 1 million people in a brutal war of aggression. He should be held accountable. He shouldn't be running for anything. But if he does, I want him to be humiliated.
All right, well, I don't think you're going to both agree on that one, but really spirited debate, and thank you both for keeping it so civil as well. Passionate but civil, which is exactly what we want here on Talk Radio. So now,